My name is Kirsten Jaqua. I'm a PhD candidate from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and I study Euripidean tragedy and female characters within the tragedies. And this is my colleague.
Hi there, I'm Patricia Moreland. I'm also a PhD candidate at UCSB, and I'm an ancient historian who specializes in warfare and politics in all sorts of different regions and time periods.
And we are both fans of Lore Olympus, which is what we'd like to talk about today, as we're all here on this panel to talk about. We'd like to discuss the contrast between the ancient myth, the primary ancient myth about Persephone's story, which is the Homeric hymn to Demeter, and the modern story as told in Rachel Smythe's Lore Olympus, because we believe that the contrast emphasizes just what this kind of myth can do for us today, how we can take the cultural value of the story, like the Homeric hymn, and make it play a similarly culturally valuable role for women in modern times. So I'd like to begin talking a little bit about the Homeric hymn to Demeter. The myth of the rape of Persephone in the Homeric hymn to Demeter is widely acknowledged by scholars to be an analogy for the coming of age moment for ancient women in Greece. Specifically, for the Homeric hymn to Demeter, it encapsulates the key moment in her life where she becomes sexually active, non-consensually, and often by arranged marriage. The Homeric hymn to Demeter is the most widely known version, as I said, of the marriage of Hades and Persephone. Like any myth, it's probably told and retold many times. This is what we call canon. There's no real canon for myth, but this is the most commonly known version. And the Homeric hymn to Demeter itself specifically does the cultural work of telling what it's like for girls to come of age and for the mothers when they lose that daughter, leaving their household to enter another household. It's also a very unique story in that it's a rare instance where it seems to represent the female perspective on marriage. So for a little more detail on this hymn, it engages with the separation and trauma experience for the mother and daughter. And we have the imagery of a young girl being snatched away for her marriage. This is a really common image in ancient times. So girls being out in nature, gathering flowers and separated from their sort of parents, their household, is a common image for girls who are of marriageable age. And marriage abduction was a common practice in a lot of different sort of parts of Greece. It was attested in the Spartan tradition, and it's also represented in art that we have in the Athenian area. Marriage is also often represented as death for women. So this is attested in scholarship like that of Leroux and Ormond, who observe that death is a natural metaphor for marriage, since in the course of the wedding, the young girl renounces herself. She has to leave the household that she was part of before and become a part of her husband's household. And this image of marriage as death appears in Greek literature and in Greek art, as well as in the Homeric hymn to Demeter. We see it in ancient tragedy, such as Sophocles' Antigone, where Antigone is buried alive, effectively, and as sort of part of her marriage, and also in Sophocles' Trachiniae. So Persephone in this myth is in a way a cipher. She's a nondescript bride of death. We don't really get to know her. We don't follow her experience. We just hear about it. She represents any young woman who is ripped from her childhood home and mother. So she represents that. Her name, Corey, makes her stand in sort of for any young woman, young girl, Corey. But instead, we focus on her mother, who is grieving for the metaphorically dead daughter. So the Homeric hymn to Demeter asks what is the pivotal question for our presentation: what are the repercussions of a woman coming of age? So for the Homeric hymn to Demeter, we're asking what the repercussions are for an ancient woman coming of age. In ancient times, this separation was forced. The mother and daughter didn't really have a say in who the daughter married or when she was separated. All of this stuff was beyond their control. So the story of the Homeric hymn to Demeter focuses on the grief and pain of that separation, but specifically for the mother. So we follow Demeter through her experiences in the mortal world after Persephone is taken away from her, as she grieves and tries to process that separation. This is also a generational trauma. So it's an expected trauma. Every woman sort of knows that it's coming, and they know that it's happening, and they know that they don't have control over it. Persephone and Demeter therefore become sort of a paradigmatic mother-daughter pair. They represent the generalized experience of any women in the ancient world. Since they expect this, and it happens regularly to all women, and they know they can't control it, they grieve, and the pain and the feelings are very clear in the Homeric hymn to Demeter, to the degree that she stops doing her work, she stops fertilizing the earth. But there isn't really a strong resolution. Demeter's able to get Persephone back part of the time, but can't completely stop what's happening. She has some power in the situation, partially because she's an incredibly powerful goddess, but she can't reverse the decision. So there's no clear resolution. There's not a lot of healing from it. And as we know, this is a pattern that continues to happen. This is why we have our seasonal effects that come from the hymn. This continues to happen. Demeter will continually lose Persephone and grieve again every time in this cycle. So there's not very much resolution or healing for the women in the ancient story. So we'd like to argue that these hymns, or these two stories, serve a similar purpose. And these are the ways in which they're similar. They're both uniquely female focused. They aim to tell a story and bring forth specifically the emotions and experiences of women. They focus on that pivotal moment when a young woman comes of age and the impact of that moment specifically on the mother and daughter bond. They also both address the dynamics of men and women and where the power lies between them. And they show moments where women encounter trauma and force in the world, both ancient and modern, where to varying degrees, the men hold more power or more force than the women do.
So let us turn to Lore Olympus then, our modern myth retelling. As Kirsten pointed out, both stories ask, well, what happens when a young woman comes of age? But here are significant differences, right? Obviously, one of the big differences is that, yes, Lore Olympus does feature a romance story. However, its primary focus is still in exploring Persephone's coming of age and her struggle to become independent and choose her own future, and what that means. In addition, Lore Olympus sets its story in a modern world. Although the mortal realm is still ancient Greece, the divine realm, it is not. Instead, it is full of familiar modern technology, laptops, cell phones, cars, and we even find jokes about this could have been an email, when it comes to Zoom meetings, right? So it is in this world that Smythe, the author, asks the same questions as the Homeric hymn to Demeter. What happens when a woman comes of age? So the answer to the question has three significant differences from the story of an ancient woman coming of age. First, given that Lore Olympus is set in modern times, the separation of Demeter and Persephone is voluntary. Persephone breaks away from her parental guidance and control to build her own life experiences. And the separation between her and her mother in this story is one Persephone chooses. Strongly supported and maybe even encouraged by Demeter, but still it's between the daughter and the mother. There's no outside agency, right? Whereas in the ancient world, there was no agency on the part of either mother or daughter. Instead, Lore Olympus shows a conflict between these two. Demeter is trying to keep her daughter close to home and guide her into the arms of the goddesses of eternal maidenhood, so nicely abbreviated TGOME, to protect Persephone. So Persephone gets a scholarship from this organization, which is reminiscent sort of a sorority in that they give out scholarships to young women who will join and adhere to the membership requirements, which, virginity is one of them, right? So Persephone breaks free sort of in that she goes to college, but it is Demeter who has already chosen her career. Afterwards, in Demeter's opinion, Persephone will graduate and then run her mother's barley business. Which leads us to ask, is it really independence if Demeter has chosen her whole career path for Persephone? It is clear that Demeter has power and agency over Persephone. But Persephone is struggling and fighting and to try to find her own voice and agency. Secondly, it is this struggle of Persephone to find herself, to find her own footing and voice that Lore Olympus is focused on. Whereas the myth of Demeter, as Kirsten has said, is focused very much on the mother. But here we don't follow Demeter around mourning after Persephone is kidnapped for marriage, but instead we get to experience the worldview mostly from Persephone and how she's learning and growing beyond her childhood world as she leaves her mother's closely controlled realm and is exposed to new people and new ideas, which very much reflects the ideal traditional American college experience of going out there and exploring and seeing the world and finding oneself. As said, the bulk of the story focuses on Persephone, realizing though over time that she does not want the path her mother has laid out for her. That even despite the traumatic experiences she has as in she's seeking her independence, she still wants that independence and self-sufficiency. Persephone learns to build healthy relationships beyond these narrow bounds her mother laid out for her previously. Before Persephone goes off to college in the divine realm, her mother had chosen all her companions, hiding her away safely in the mortal realm out of sight from the other gods. And Persephone grew up thus very sheltered, surrounded only by female flower nymphs. In order for Persephone to be allowed to go to college and into the divine realm, Persephone had to agree to move in with Artemis, who is another pre-approved companion by her mother. Let me just point out again too that previously all of Persephone's companions, as picked by her mother, had been female. However, as Persephone goes to college, she starts to break out of her mother's sheltered sphere by also building healthy friendships with male divinities, such as Hermes and Eros, and of course, Hades. But unfortunately, Artemis's house, space, domain did not turn out to be as safe as a companion as Demeter had expected it to be for her daughter. And Persephone experienced trauma at that place. The difference is, if we go to the next slide, is how trauma is dealt with. As Kirsten also pointed out previously, there is really no resolution in Demeter's hymn for the trauma that mother and daughter experience. It's a generational, ongoing, expected thing. However, here, we now have healthy avenues in Lore Olympus for healing and resolution for women from traumatic experiences of sexual misconduct. Persephone seeks out therapy. Her therapist, Chiron, is, well, a female centaur in this aspect and encourages Persephone to explore her feelings. Chiron helps Persephone to not only acknowledge the trauma that she has experienced, but also points out to her struggle to separate her desires and her goals from what her mother has planned for her, helping her find her own voice and becoming aware that she does not necessarily want to do what her mother wants her to do. So if we briefly also think about the medium, obviously the hymn to Demeter is a public musical performance taking place during specific rituals, specific occasions. Lore Olympus is a comic found on Webtoon that uses music, colors, and pictures to get its points across. And Kirsten will talk more about how the art really delves into healing, dealing with trauma.
So the Homeric hymn to Demeter is a really interesting instance because we don't have a lot of moments of expressing women's feelings in literature, and this doesn't have a specific author, the Homeric hymn to Demeter, but it does seem to speak a lot to female experience and female feelings about this separation and this traumatic experience that women have. In that sense, it was expressed through music, which is its own art form, and we don't have the music that probably accompanied the hymn to Demeter, but we do have, of course, the art form that Smythe uses to express trauma and also to use the art as an expression of healing and growing through trauma and growing beyond trauma. So I've chosen this image for this slide because it has a really familiar image that all of us who read Lore Olympus will see. This twisted musical staff that represents the sexual misconduct, the abuse that Persephone experienced at the hands of Apollo, who is a god of music. This twisted musical staff represents the trauma that Persephone feels whenever she is reminded about that experience that she had. And it's a really powerful way to represent Persephone's feelings through the story, because whenever these traumas are triggered in her mind, we see this musical staff twisted and sort of warping and trickling through the panel, showing her feelings as she's remembering what she experienced and struggling with it. So the panels of the comic are connected by this twisted thread that she's struggling with. And this staff continues throughout much of the story as she's dealing with it to let us know her feelings through the art. But it helps us to see how Persephone heals. In a fairly recent episode of Lore Olympus, we saw that staff return as Persephone was finally starting to grow beyond her trauma, as she has gone down into the mortal realm during her trial. We see that staff in the panels weave into an actual physical weaving that Persephone creates as she can't sleep at night, dealing with these thoughts. And it's a moment where we start to see her grow beyond it and build something else for herself, because the musical staff it goes into the weaving that Persephone creates. And Persephone, as we know, a fertility goddess, is creating a weaving of a tree, very representative of who Persephone is and the way that she creates things. She uses that staff, and it straightens out and turns into the woven mesh that creates the tree that Persephone makes, which is a representation of Persephone building her experiences into a future that she chooses and she creates in a constructive and healthy way. So the Homeric hymns, as Patricia pointed out, they celebrate individual gods. They're part of an oral performance, a religious performance of celebration. And Rachel Smythe's webcomic, of course, moves the story into this new medium, a vivid artistic rendering. And both of them are sort of unique sources that offer glimpses into the lives and feelings of women. However, as I said, we don't know who told the Homeric hymn to Demeter. It may have, and very likely, been performed by men, if not written by men. Rachel's story takes back this narrative in a very specifically female voice that continually addresses female feelings and thoughts and experiences. The webcomic still does for modern times what the Homeric hymn for Demeter did in ancient times. It does the cultural work of making visible the feelings, the traumas, the struggles of women who are coming of age in their time. In ancient times, it was a relatable story of the pain that women experienced, and through this story, it was something they could share, an understanding that they had. Lore Olympus likewise presents relatable experiences of breaking free of parental and social expectations, forging one's own identity in the future that can be uncomfortable, and experiencing even traumatizing experiences with sexuality and the struggles to pay for college, handle college, and choose what one wants moving forward. And it also uses what Lore Olympus does, which moves forward, is it uses storytelling as a healing device to help people process various experiences of pain and grow from it. So the answer to the fundamental question of this conference, of course, what has antiquity done for us? What does antiquity do for us as it is made into Lore Olympus, as it takes the story of Persephone and makes it something modern and ours in this modern time? Ancient sources have been used this way for a long time. The Iliad, the Odyssey, and Sophocles' Ajax and other stories have been used to help veterans process PTSD from battlefield experiences, to address something that is in a way timeless. That yes, things change over time, but there are human experiences that have stretched across generations and across millennia. Rachel Smythe's art does this same work for the challenges and traumas experienced by women who are growing into independence in a world that still struggles with gendered imbalances of power and violence against women. Smythe employs the myth of Persephone to process these issues and traumas even today. And despite the challenging topics that she tackles, she still focuses ever on healthy building of experiences, on moving forward from trauma, and she maintains hopeful themes of healing, warmth, and humor. Thank you for your attention. This is a little slide for any further reading that people would like to do, including a little article on how theater and ancient sources are used for trauma. And we hope you've enjoyed, and we look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you for having us.